It's very nice to be with you again. I came home from Nepal with a little bit of a throat something going on, so I hope it makes me sound better than I usually do. We'll see how that goes. I hope you've been well in the intervening years since our paths last crossed, and perhaps more importantly, doing good. I did peruse your website. It looks like you're up to your same old good tricks. So thanks for the good work you're doing in this community and beyond. And you've gone and done got yourself a new pastor since I was here last. Blessings on the both of you as you enter into this relationship together. I can remember when I was a new pastor at one point in my career, and I went to a new pastor's retreat. And the one question they asked each of the small groups to respond to was, what's one thing you'd like to receive from your congregation? My instinctive response was, the benefit of the doubt. We all need to cut each other some slack in this world, don't we? Oh my gosh, we can be hard on each other. Whether it's on Facebook or whether it's in politics or wherever it is, we can be really tough on each other. It's as important in the church as anywhere to cut each other some slack. We even have language especially for this. We talk about grace, we talk about mercy, we talk about forgiveness, we talk about love, we talk about forbearance. We can also talk about survival, not necessarily a biblical word, but one that's very much perhaps on our minds in the Church of the Brethren. In my home congregation down in Southwest Virginia, people can be hard enough on each other that we've lost newer members that we could not afford to lose, honestly. And how about our denomination these days? And how about our nation these days? Are we in any sense the United States of America? It hardly feels that way sometimes. This indeed is a decisive moment. We can think about denominationally, we can think about societally, just in our relationships, we can think about nationally, we can even think about epically. I'm not sure how to even say that word, in an epical sense. And by that I mean, we are setting a course over the next few years or next decade or two that will play out not over decades, perhaps not even over centuries, but perhaps over millennia. It's hard to turn down the heat on a planet once you've heated it up. It's hard to re-inject species onto the planet's surface once we've driven them off the map. It's hard to, I told this story in Sunday school about the young woman who had seen her mother have to go abroad in Nepal, the young woman we met there, who had to see her mother go abroad to do work in order to support the family. It's hard to reclaim those lost years with one's mother after you've lost those years and have no way to sort of get them back. So in all these ways, we set courses for ourselves, for the people on our planet, for God's creation on our planet, that will be hard to reclaim in one way or another. And our world tolerates this for some reason. Somehow the convenience, the comfort, the other things that keep us going down the environmental path that we're on, the way the nations set their own priorities that help some in the world stay at the top of the pecking order while others in the world are far below somewhere scrambling to pick up the crumbs that drop off the table. Our own nation, for instance, in the coming year, will spend about $1 trillion on the things that make for war. About 30 times less than that on the things that make for peace. And I have to think, which of those portends a more peaceful and secure future for all of us, spending all of that on the armaments, or perhaps spending more of that on the things that bring people together and bring healing and hope for people in this world. Well, where do we hope to go? As a denominational community, as congregational communities, as a national community, where is it that we hope to go? And what will it require of us to get to these places that we feel are the places maybe we should really be, rather than mired in the kind of contention, conflict, and almost lack of a sense of a holistic purpose that we might find otherwise. In other words, just like Jesus in the wilderness, from our scripture into the scripture that was read today, here's a person at a key point in his own life trying to decide what are the things that I need to be doing with myself, and what is the course that I need to be setting for my future. So in some ways are we at that point, as a human family, a national family, a denominational family, even in congregations, in our local community families. There was a lot in the balance for Jesus and for us as he thought about what course he needed to be taken, and as he was given different options by the tempter there on the mountaintop, on the temple top, there in the desert with the stones lying before him. He was given choices, just as we are given choices. Sometimes we think all of this is out of our hands. No. We have to take it back into our hands and decide what is it that God's calling us to do as we face this world around us and the many perils that seem to be confronting us in this time. When I think about Jesus' choices there, and I think about some of our choices that we face today, I sort of boil it down to the mantra of me, more, now. That seems to be the temptation that's being offered to us, to focus on ourselves, to focus on more, and to focus on the immediacy rather than what the future prosperity may look like. First, let's take the one, it's all about me. Is that what that little scene at the top of the temple was all about? Show everybody how cool you are, how well connected you are, how simply amazing you are, how you're more than willing, even entitled, to use divine favor to make yourself look good. Take that flying leap. Watch God come in and save the day. When God's energy, God's divine presence, might well have been directed outward to some other purpose other than just making yourself look good. One of our stops on our recent Nepal learning tour was the Peace Pagoda on the top of a mountain outside of Pokhara, Nepal. That pagoda shines bright and white atop a small mountain. Well, it wouldn't appear small to us in Virginia or Pennsylvania, but in Nepal, where you've got the Himalaya to compare it to, it was a small mountain. And it beckons people to come up and pay homage to the idea of world peace and to pray for world peace. And it invites you, as you enter the kind of ceremonial area surrounding the pagoda, to enter that place in silence, to give space for your prayer time, for your thoughts for this better, more peaceful world. But of course, we're probably not going to do that. Take that quiet time, take that prayer time for a thing like that. As I looked around me, it seemed like everybody was either posing for a selfie or taking somebody else's selfie with the pagoda as a backdrop, and there was near constant chatter. People couldn't be quiet for a moment. Now, I don't speak Nepali. I didn't get the sense that they were praying for world peace. Let's just put it that way. It was all more about me and my being near the pagoda rather than anything that had to do with peace and harmony in the world, and using that as a moment to try to bring those things into being through our prayers, through our own commitments to working toward this other world. It was all about them, which is pretty much the mantra of our own consumer society. It's all about you. It's all about me. What we drink, drive, dress, and drool over, those are the things we hear about day after day, hour after hour, minute after minute in our commercial surroundings. And it can also mean it's all about us. And here the us is not very inclusive or expansive. It usually means people like us in some way or another. I'm from Virginia, the home of the infamous Unite the Right rally summer before last, where it was about us, but in a very narrow sense of who's included in the term us. And this can spill over into our spiritual life as well, which more and more in our own society and maybe other places in the world is more about what has God done for me lately. So even God, the expansive presence in our lives that theoretically can be pushing us outward and engaging us with our world in new and profound ways, we've often pulled that God back into our own little corral to say, what can you do for me, God? How can my life be improved? How can my world be made better? Rather than thinking about how God can be this presence that moves us to engage the world for betterment and for blessing. Of course, it's not always that way, fortunately. I think that was one of Jesus' challenges in the wilderness there, to say, is this just about me or is it about others? Sometimes we find others in our own society rising to respond in the same way Jesus did, saying it's not just about me. I was out in Southern California making my annual swing, I guess just last fall. And one of my regular stops on that swing is an elementary school called Richard B. Haynes Elementary. It's in a low-income area of Ontario, California. It's populated by mostly Hispanic kids with a smattering of other ethnic and racial groups. And most of the kids there are on free and reduced lunches. I mean, that's the kind of school we're talking about. So they have me meet with classes all through the day. They give me the cafeteria. There's a short break for lunch, and otherwise I'm with first graders, second graders, whatever, all through the day. Well, at one point I'm with the fourth graders. And one of the things I do wherever I am is try to extol the virtues of bicycle riding for all kinds of reasons. Of an environmental presentation. And one way I do it is I talk about the advantages of riding a bicycle. And I tell them about a situation last summer when I was visiting my son up in Woodstock, Illinois. I was out on his bicycle. I borrowed it for the day to do some riding. And while I was out, I asked the kids to guess what I found on that bike ride. And I give them multiple choice. I say, A, did I find an aluminum can? B, did I find a shirt that actually fits me? C, did I find a dime? D, did I find a dead possum? Or E, did I find all of the above? And of course, it's all of the above. And so I start pulling the things out of the backpack. I've got them there with me. I pull out the can. I give my little talk on how much energy is in one aluminum can. It's like filling it half full of gasoline and pouring it out if you don't recycle it. So I get a little environmental story out of that. I pull the shirt out. It fits me nicely. It's got a tag of where it was made, and I talk about children like them around the world, often working in sweatshops. So I get a story out of that. I pull out the dime, and I say, a dime doesn't seem like much. And if you're in a car, you're not even going to see it when you're passing by. But on a bike, you spot things like this. And with a dime, I can keep a girl in South Sudan in school for a day. And then I reach in like I'm going to pull out the possum. You should see their eyes light up. And I say, I must have left that possum at home. But I do get a story out of that. And I tell them that used to be possums didn't live in Illinois, where my son lives now. They used to live down in cool places like Virginia and Pennsylvania, but now they move further and further because of climate change. So I get a climate change story out of the fact that I found a possum dead on arrival on one of my bike rides. Well, I went on with the presentation. Maybe it was environmental. I don't really remember what. Went on with the presentation. And as it was over, time came that it was finished. They began to file out. Well, one little girl stayed behind, came up. She handed me a dime. Then another little girl came up and handed me a dime. Then another child came up and handed me a dime. And it got me thinking, these kids may be of limited means and may have more pressing matters to think about in their own family lives, but they're not of limited capacity to care. They've seen beyond the me and encompassed the us in the broadest sense, willing to help other kids who may not have it even as fortunate as they have it, these young kids in Ontario, California. When thinking of God's earth and its people, when has that sentiment been more important than now? And thank God Jesus rejected the me temptation, making his mission in life not about himself and what God could do for him, but what God could do through him for others. Then there was the temptation of more. In Jesus' case, power over all the kingdoms of the earth. What's not to like about this one? If you're Jesus or if you're us, what's not to like about this? Absolute control over everyone and everything at our disposal. Think of the good Jesus could have done, all the harm that could have been avoided over the centuries, all the better decisions that might have been made about caring for God's creation and for God's children. But wait, there was a catch. Bend the knee to Satan was the little quid pro quo that was required in that particular negotiation. If you want to have all these kingdoms, you only need to worship me. Now, Jesus, or we, could have had it all for a price. And that price is to put our allegiance to something other than God. And what would that do to all those better decisions we would have made? I think it might have undermined them pretty substantially. I'm guessing they would have very likely gone to fill in the blank, as Satan was the one offering this temptation. We can think of ways that we ourselves fall prey. Even not having been in Jesus' position to take advantage of all the power, we can think of advantage that we ourselves fall prey to using the power that we have in this world in ways that aren't always to the best good. We know it all too well, especially those of us in the rich world who we really do have pretty much control of the place, if you think about it. Environmentally, politically, economically. Economically, we have young women making our clothes in Bangladesh for 35 cents an hour. What's not to like about that? Cheap clothes, whenever we want them, changing fashions all the time, not really paying much of a price for it ourselves, although some are. As we saw in Nepal, poverty is really the driving force between a global network of human trafficking. As I said during Sunday school, just from Nepal alone, 35,000 people a year trafficked out to other countries for various purposes, hardly any of them good. Politically, present events in Washington remind us the extent to which other countries need to try to curry our favor and the direction they are pushed to just get us to cast a glance in their way of attention or financial support or whatever it may be. It skews the power balances in the world when some have so much of it and others have so little of it. And I see it play out in local settings around the world, this idea that some have such power over others and they get to call the shots. Power imbalances make for bad choices, I have found in my experience. We go to Uganda. We don't really do much work in Uganda. Our main focus in East Africa has been South Sudan, but so many Sudanese have had to flee South Sudan because of war to go to refugee camps in Uganda that we've actually been spending some time in Uganda recently on our learning tours. On a recent one, I showed the picture during Sunday school, and I reminded the people there who were in Sunday school to remember that photo. It was of an orphanage not too far from a refugee camp actually, but an orphanage in Uganda that had been located in South Sudan, but it had to move because of the war over to Uganda next door. Well, I knew the pastor there. I'd met him before when he was in South Sudan. He was also helping us implement some programming in the refugee camps in Uganda. And so we paid a courtesy visit to greet him and to see how things were going with the orphanage. Well, he gave us a tour of the place while we were there. There was the typical classrooms and dormitories made out of canvas stretched over sticks and that sort of thing. Then there was a beautiful new chapel on site, which looked a little out of place, but there it was. As we got to that part of the tour, he said, yes, a South Korean Christian man kind of stumbled upon our orphanage by happenstance, saw the children that day holding worship service under a tree, which, as you may know, people around the world meet under trees for all kinds of purposes. He felt sorry for them not having a chapel of their own, and on the spot told me, I'm going to commit $10,000 of my own money to building a nice chapel for you here at the orphanage. So $10,000 later of his own money and a lot of his own labor, I guess he was a construction guy back in South Korea, there stood this really nice chapel on the orphanage property. Well, after the tour was over, I couldn't help myself. I asked the pastor, before this happened, if the South Korean if the South Korean Christian person had come to you and say, I've got $10,000 I want to donate to your orphanage, I said, Pastor, what would you have told them were your most pressing needs? He said without hesitation, dormitories. It made me so angry. At the disrespect it shows for the local people, not even to ask what their needs are. And then for, you might say, the wasted resources. Now, I'm not one to say church buildings are a wasted resource, but in terms of what was really needed there, that money, at least in the pastor's eyes who was running the place, what was really needed there were places for the children to sleep well at night. That's how it works in this world often. The ones with the power get to call the shots. And we can also think about in terms of power over God's creation. What have we touched that we have not bruised? Where have we stepped we have not crushed on God's fine earth? On Friday, I asked the kids at the assembly at Manham Township Middle School if there was a stream nearby that they would drink from. They looked startled. You know, there would have been a time in North America when the streams around us would have been drinkable. I also told them that today there are 60% fewer living creatures on earth than when I was their age. They're gone from the seas, from the skies, from the forests, from the fens. They and you, me, we all know the reasons. Habitat loss, overharvesting, pollution, the list goes on, all at the hands of humans and our power over the things around us. I mentioned climate change earlier. When I was younger, I took some consolation in the thought that we could foul the streams and fell the forests, but at least we couldn't mess with the weather. Silly me. Even this was within human reach. But therein lies the good news, according to David Wallace Wells in his recent book called The Uninhabitable Earth. He points a bleak picture of the future if the climate change trend continues, unless, and this is where the hopeful part comes in, he notes that unlike all other greenhouse gas calamities in history, and by the way, except for the time the asteroid struck the Earth, all the other mass extinctions have been because of greenhouse gases have accumulated in the atmosphere from various earthly events. He said, unlike all the others in history, this one was caused by human activity. Therefore, it can be reversed by human activity. That's his note of hope at which is otherwise a very bleak book, honestly. The opening line of the book is, it's worse, much worse than you think. But then he ends the book with this note of optimism that we have made this bed, we can also unmake it. We have it within our capacity to do the right thing by God's earth and the right thing for future generations. We broke it, we can fix it. That's kind of what he says about climate change. And we can say that about a myriad of other issues, whether it's plastic pollution or you can pick your item about that. It won't come without a lot of struggle and probably a little pain. But I guess since when have Christians been averse to a little sacrifice for a higher cause? I mean, Jesus actually calls us to this kind of behavior, this kind of lifestyle, to be willing to be self-sacrificial for the betterment of the whole or for the liveliness of others. Which brings us to the third word of our temptation trifecta, and that is now. Jesus is hungry there in the wilderness. He's been fasting for 40 days. We can barely go 4 hours without eating, you know us. And Satan offers him a tantalizing and tasty temptation. If you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. I'm glad it wasn't me. I love sandwiches, actually. In other words, use the power you have to satisfy your physical needs of the moment. What could be more important or appropriate than that? Well, I guess there was something. As our Lord famously replies, one doesn't live by bread alone, but by listening to God's voice. That's the real source of life. Not that we don't need bread also. It's not the only thing we need. Now imagine having a thought like that in a world like ours, where Amazon soon plans to make everything they sell you deliverable next day. Indeed, instant access is the name of our game. Strawberries in the dead of winter. And they don't taste like real strawberries. You know what I'm saying there. But we must fall for the color or something. Flip of a switch, and all the power we need instantaneously for the average of 65 electronic gadgets each of us has in our homes. I'm just telling you what they tell me in terms of the averages. Hop in our car anytime we want to go wherever we want, as gasoline prices remain relatively the same as when some of us started to drive many decades ago. The comparable price of gasoline has not gone up compared to the rate of inflation. Or, as Kay Geyer, a pastor from Indiana, summed it up during the final session of our Nepal learning tour, barely a week ago, I guess, comfort. Life should be livable, yes, but what price the level of daily comfort we have come to expect? And especially the cost to future generations. As a professor at Manchester University said in a session there recently, when did we stop caring what happened to our grandchildren? Of course, we should perhaps cut ourselves some slack, as we've never really been in this situation before in human history, where one generation's actions today will have a ripple effect for generations and generations to come. Jesus saw the temptation here to put immediate desire above higher values, God's higher values. He resisted. Thank God. He resisted. So must we. Some are resisting. Fortunately, you see this, I see this in my work. We got a check. When I got back from Nepal, it was waiting on me, a check for $300 for our Million Tree campaign from the Morgantown Church of the Brethren. They want to plant trees to offset their own carbon emissions because they are worried about what that will mean for future generations to come. And by planting trees, and for $300, they can plant 3,000 trees through our program. They will take a little bit of the bite out of climate change for those coming after them. There are young people in our network who are the palm oil police in their households. We saw during Sunday school, some of the rest of you know from just reading the news, that we're cutting down rainforests around the world to replace them with palm oil plantations because they find that palm oil, they can make a few cents more per liter than they can with canola oil or sunflower oil or something else. And it's a devil's bargain. Palm oil today, no rainforest tomorrow. And how does that bode for our planetary well-being? After reading the ingredient list, a girl up in Mannheim said recently, no thank you, to candy her grandparents wanted to give her because she discovered with her sleuthing that there was palm oil in the ingredients list. She wouldn't eat the candy they handed her. They were a little surprised, but also a little proud. And now they've come to brag on her because they see a girl, their grandchild, who's been awakened to something more important than just having a sweet in her mouth. For her, the candy of the moment is not worth the rainforest of the future. Tom Benevento at our Sustainable Living Center in Harrisonburg, Virginia, recently helped the mayor of that town see the long-term and drastic effects of climate change on their community, and especially on the poor in the United States as well as around the world, and secured her vote on an upcoming city council meeting for a citywide plan to cut climate emissions by 25% by the year 2025. And up in Starksboro, Vermont, our coordinator there, Pete, which some of you saw a picture of during Sunday school, our coordinator there, Pete, in conjunction with the local library, has initiated a series of monthly community meals where everybody is invited, including people who get food from the Food Share program. They all come to a community meal where there's no real agenda, but just to get to know each other and to build friendships and relationships. Pete said, this is essential. This kind of community building, this is essential if we're, I can't read my writing. I'm sorry, I just wrote this early this morning. Such a choice. He said this is essential if we hope to address these critical changes coming upon our community from climate change, from food insecurity, from many of the different things that are affecting the well-being of our local communities. We have to get to know each other and learn to trust each other. So when it comes time to make the hard decisions, we can make the hard decisions together. So this idea of addressing the looming calamities that we face, not coming at it from different vantage points, all having different information, all having different relationships, all this, but coming together to address these things as communities that care about each other and trust each other and see that we have common purposes. In the end, we have common purposes to survive and thrive in this world. And they are there. If we sweep away all the other clutter that the media outlets and all the other commercial enterprises and all the other people want to overlay on top of all this. At the core, we're human beings looking for the same things at the end of the day. How do we help each other find them? In a way that not only safeguards ourselves, but also the future generations to come. All these people are joining Jesus to say no to now, when now imperils tomorrow, and yes to our deeper values regarding care for God's earth and concern for God's children and our own children, even if this puts a crimp in our current comfort level. The cover on your bulletin. It's from our recent Nepal learning tour. It's taken of a friend of mine on that trip on a ridge in the foothills of the Himalaya. Being around high mountains draws one to ponder life. Maybe because we can see further. Maybe because we are further away from the distractions that want to draw our attention elsewhere. Maybe because we feel closer to God, being up there in the stratosphere. Interestingly enough, that's where Jesus ended up, with Satan, on those high places, looking over the vast panorama of what awaited him, what awaited us, as he and we moved into that future. We need to follow Jesus to some place where we can ponder what God may be asking of us in this time. At few times in history has humanity, I'm sorry, this is just my personal perspective, but from my personal perspective, at few times in history has humanity been at such a crossroads with so much hanging in the balance, and especially for those coming after us. And as did Jesus, may we clearly see the challenges we face, because one temptation that's not mentioned here in Matthew's gospel is the temptation just to look the other way and pretend this isn't happening. As did Jesus, may we have the courage to see the challenges we face and to confront them in faith, hope, love, and may I add, community. And with our Lord, may we not succumb to me more now, but instead commit our lives to us enough tomorrow. For the glory of God, for our neighbor's good, for the healing of all creation, and for a future of peace and prosperity for all. May it be so.